In October 2023, the UN Security Council authorised a major new security mission for Haiti. Spearheaded by 1,000 police from Kenya, it will attempt to tackle the epidemic of gang violence that's left thousands dead over the past year. But even before it starts, the mission is mired in controversy. More to the point, with a long track record of trying to manage Haiti's deep-rooted problems, can this new UN operation really hope to win a war against the violent groups that are plaguing the country? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Kerr-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security and statehood. Failed states are a significant source of instability in the modern international system. As the central administration collapses and can't carry out the essential functions of governance, they can threaten peace and security. As well as becoming a lawless haven for terrorist groups and criminal organisations, they can spur conflicts and lead to large-scale migration. But just how far can and should the international community go to stabilise these states? This question has come to the fore with the collapse of Haiti. No stranger to political unrest, it hosted a long-standing UN mission for a decade and a half. However, since its final withdrawal in 2019, the country has continued deteriorating as violent groups have terrorised its capital, Port-au-Prince. But as the UN prepares to send yet another mission to tackle the country's problems, is there any chance that Haiti can at last be stabilised? The Republic of Haiti makes up a little over a third of Hispaniola, the second largest island in the Caribbean after Cuba. Sharing the island with the Dominican Republic to its east, Haiti covers 28,000 square kilometres or around 11,000 square miles, making it the 143rd largest country in the world. Its closest other neighbours are Cuba to its west and the Turks and Caicos, a British overseas territory, to its north. Its population currently stands at 11.5 million. Meanwhile, with a per capita GDP of around $1,750 a year, it's the poorest country in the Americas. Although Haiti was inhabited long before the arrival of Europeans, our story starts on the 5th of December 1492 when Christopher Columbus anchored off the coast of Hispaniola. Having established a base on the island, Spain would use it to conquer the New World. However, as its empire expanded, the island's importance declined, and by the end of the 17th century, the population had fallen dramatically, and parts of the island had become a pirate haven. As a result, in 1697, Spain formally ceded the western third of the island to France, then expanding its holdings in the Caribbean and North America. Under French rule, the territory prospered. With its coffee and sugar plantations, it became one of the wealthiest colonies in the Americas. But the problems were already emerging. Its agriculture relied on over 500,000 slaves working under brutal and appalling conditions. Tensions also grew between the 30,000 European colonists and the 25,000 or so predominantly mixed-raced, free inhabitants. In August 1791, a revolt broke out. Although France promised to end slavery, the uprising continued, and by 1800 the rebels controlled the territory. And while France launched a fresh counterattack 2 years later, capturing the rebellion's leader, Toussaint Louverture, now regarded as Haiti's founder, the fight back was short-lived. With the start of the Napoleonic Wars in Europe and already withdrawing from North America, the French army was defeated by Haitian forces in November 1803. 2 months later, on the 1st of January 1804, Haiti formally proclaimed independence, becoming only the second sovereign state in the Americas after the United States. From the start, the country faced enormous difficulties. Following the assassination of its first president, it was divided between two competing factions for a decade and a half. Then, having annexed the eastern part of the island in 1822, its Spanish-speaking inhabitants rebelled, declaring independence as the Dominican Republic in 1844. On top of this, the country also faced significant international opposition. Having refused to accept its independence for 20 years, France only relented in 1825 after Haiti agreed to pay a huge compensation package that would stunt its economic growth for decades to come. Meanwhile, it would be yet another 30 years before the United States finally accepted the country. Afraid of a state created from slavery, it took until 1862 to recognise Haiti. Despite these difficult beginnings, Haiti in fact flourished in the last quarter of the 19th century as political stability brought economic growth. However, this success was short-lived. Following the outbreak of the First World War, and as fears grew about growing German business interests in the Caribbean, the United States used the assassination of Haiti's president to invade the country. This would mark the start of almost 2 decades of US military rule, which only ended in 1934. Although Haiti was a founding member of the United Nations at the end of the Second World War, its difficulties continued. In 1957, it came under the rule of François Duvalier. Known as Papa Doc Duvalier, he played on black resentment of the dominant mixed-race elite to impose a dictatorship that was underpinned by a widely feared militia, the Tonton Macoute. This continued under his son Jean-Claude, Baby Doc Duvalier, who took over when his father died in 1971. He would go on to rule the country for another decade and a half until a popular uprising forced him to flee in 1986. Over the next 4 years, the country was ruled by a series of provisional governments until in 1990 Haiti held its first free elections in almost half a century. This saw Jean-Bertrand Aristide, a former Catholic priest, elected as president. Although many hoped that this would be a new start for the country, Aristide was overthrown by a military coup just 9 months later and fled to the United States. But while international pressure eventually saw the military regime agree to return the country to civilian rule in 1993, supported by a UN mission, the deal quickly unravelled when the generals refused to let Aristide return. However, as the United States threatened to invade, they soon gave in, and Aristide was reinstated as president. Having decided not to run for a second term in 1996, Aristide was re-elected in 2000. But this only lasted until 2004, when he was forced to flee the country yet again after massive anti-government protests led to violent clashes between armed groups. As the country now sank into chaos, the UN Security Council stepped in and authorised the creation of a multinational interim force to restore order. Just months later, this was succeeded by another UN operation, the United Nations Stabilisation Mission in Haiti, MINUSTAH. This was tasked with returning the country to democracy by strengthening governing institutions and protecting human rights. Over the following years, the UN tried to ease conditions in the country. However, hopes that Haiti could return to some degree of normality were destroyed on the 12th of January 2010 when the country suffered a devastating earthquake just west of its capital. The scale of the tragedy was horrific. As well as killing up to 250,000 people, it destroyed hundreds of thousands of homes and much of the country's infrastructure. Millions were left in need of emergency assistance. Over the next decade, the country attempted to rebuild. But while MINUSTAH was finally withdrawn in 2017 and replaced by a smaller 2-year justice support operation designed to support the rule of law in the country, Haiti's problems nevertheless remained. As well as having the lowest per capita income in the Americas, it remained widely regarded as the most fragile country in the Western Hemisphere. In addition, it continued to be affected by natural disasters. As well as a severe tropical storm in 2016, it was hit by yet another earthquake in 2021 that left 2,000 dead and destroyed 50,000 homes. This has also seen sporadic outbreaks of diseases such as cholera. But the most serious threat to the country has come from the massive growth in gang violence. While this saw increasing numbers of casualties and thousands displaced as groups fought for control over the country's capital, the problem really only came to international attention when, in July 2021, the country's president was assassinated by intruders who broke into the official residence. Since then, the country's capital has become a battlefield as rival groups fight for control. According to the latest figures, over 3,500 people have been killed in the 9 months until October 2023, a significant rise from the previous year. In addition, an estimated 200,000 have been forced to flee their homes. In one recent shootout, children and teachers were trapped in a school for 3 days as rival gangs fought for control. Meanwhile, the country remains politically paralysed. Following the last elections in 2016 and still under an acting president, no democratically elected officials now remain in office. It's against this backdrop that the Security Council finally agreed to act, accepting that the violence represents a threat to the peace and security of Haiti as well as to the wider region. On the 2nd of October 2023, it passed a resolution under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which covers actions with respect to threats to the peace, breaches of the peace, and acts of aggression. This establishes a new multinational security support mission for Haiti. Due to come into operation on the 1st of January 2024, it'll be led by over 1,000 police from Kenya and is specifically tasked with helping the Haitian National Police Force regain order. At the same time, it's hoped to create conditions for new elections. However, the mission hasn't been without its problems. Already, there's been pushback in Kenya, following an objection from an opposition politician who argued that the mission was unconstitutional as it hadn't been underpinned by any law or treaty. A Kenyan court issued an injunction halting the deployment of the police. But with the country's president calling it a mission for humanity, the government has insisted that all necessary procedures will be followed. Moreover, it won't undermine the country's own security. At the same time, the mission has also raised questions elsewhere. While Russia and China accepted the grave situation in Haiti, they abstained from supporting the resolution. For its part, Beijing raised concerns about imposing a security operation on a country without a legitimate government. Meanwhile, Moscow argued that sending a military force to a country must be thought through, especially when it doesn't have a clear mandate. But others have been more outspoken. For example, some have condemned the mission as a tool of American colonialism, pointing to the long history of US involvement in Haiti's affairs. But while the resolution was indeed drafted by the United States alongside Ecuador, such criticisms seem rather at odds with the fact that the mission was supported by most of the Security Council and not opposed by Russia and China, and is overwhelmingly African-led. Leaving aside the debates over the motives of the mission, the big question is whether and how it can now succeed. The range and scale of the problems that Haiti faces are huge and go beyond mere policing, as important as this is to stabilising the situation. The underlying challenges will remain even if the mission can rein in the gangs. In this sense, as worthy as this new initiative is, there's a real danger that it'll simply be another in a long line of UN efforts that have attempted to stabilise Haiti, but have, ultimately, failed to fix this failed state. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.